Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures and the sermon for the previous Sunday, and this video is for Sunday, October 12th. I have relocated just for the fun of it, and I am in one of the kids' time rooms. You can see something on the wall behind me back there, and it's a room that reminds me that faith formation is happening for our young people. So I love the energy of this room. So I decided to come in here for a change. So the scriptures for this past Sunday that were assigned were 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 3 and 7 through 15c. The psalm was Psalm 111. The second reading was 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 8 through 15. And the gospel was from Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. I preached this past Sunday on the first reading because it is the story of the healing of the Aramean army commander Naaman from his skin disease. In order to be healed, he has to travel back into the land where he was ransacking and running amok and causing havoc, basically the land of his enemies, which was Israel at the time. And it's just a very interesting story. So one of the couple things I want to mention about that, I don't want to spend too much time on it though, because I already preached on it. But the first thing that was kind of an issue, this happens sometimes in these scriptures, is that for some reason verses 4 through 6 were cut out of the reading. And so the reading picked up in a very awkward place. After verse 4, it started, the story was that Naaman talked all about Naaman and who he was, but that he had this skin disease. And then it said that a slave girl who they had taken from Israel, who was serving his wife, said, "Oh, if only he knew of the prophet in Samaria, he could be healed." Then it goes and it starts, "When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, 'Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his skin disease?'" Just look at how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. And that's like, what? Very confusing. Basically what happened is Naaman went to the king of Israel with a letter, basically saying what he wanted, that he would like to have to be healed. So, and the king of Israel, that's why the king of Israel reacts this way. The king's like, I can't, are you kidding me? Like, I can't do this. What do you mean by bringing me this letter and expecting somehow to be healed? And then there's somebody who says, or Elisha hears of this and is like, yo, why are you acting like a crazy person? He wants to come and see me. Let him come and find out that there is a prophet in Israel. And so it's just a temporary detour to the king, who can do nothing about the skin disease. And Elisha the prophet finds out and is like, "Oh yeah, don't worry, send him to me." And so the story continues, as we found out on Sunday, how eventually Naaman is healed of the skin disease. The other thing I wanted to point out, so the other thing that I wanted to mention as one of the other points to this story is the idea that this person who was considered an enemy to Israel is still healed by God. And at the end of the story, Naaman says, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel." And so there's the point of the fact that God cares for all people, that nobody that you might consider an enemy is outside of the reach of God. And so in one sense, this reminds us that if God is at work, when God is at work, even those who might be considered people who don't believe in God, or people who don't worship God, or even somebody who we might consider an enemy, can be transformed. That's the power and the expanse of the mercy of God, is that God can work faith in anybody, not just people considered people of faith. And the connection then between the first reading and the gospel I didn't preach on, but the gospel is the story about there were 10 men with a skin disease, and they call out to Jesus to have mercy on them. So Jesus says, go show yourselves to the priests. What that means is basically the priests would be the one to examine them and to say they are clean. They can now, be an active part of the community once again. So that's why Jesus tells them to go show themselves to the priests, because as they go on their way, they realize that they've been healed. But there's one of those who, rather than running off like the rest of them, which they're just doing what Jesus told them to do, but one of them comes back to Jesus and he praises God with a loud voice, and he kneels at Jesus' feet and thanks him. Oh, and by the way, he was a Samaritan. So the background of that, which you may be familiar with, is by the time of Jesus, there was a hatred between the Judeans and the Samaritans. Judeans were people who lived kind of in the southern part of the region down around Jerusalem. Samaritans lived, I think I would say, kind of northwest of Judea. And then there was Galilee, which were they were Galileans, they were still considered Jews. Samaritans were considered a mixed race, because they had intermarried with Gentiles, with people who didn't believe in God, who were not Jewish. And so that's why there was bad blood between the two groups, the Jews and Samaritans of the time. It's because they just had animosity towards one another for cultural difference, because they had cultural differences. Samaritans were still people who were worshipers of God, and they still kind of drew their line of their ancestral line to the Jews. It's just that over the centuries, over the years, they had intermarried with Gentiles. But they worshipped God. They just didn't have their temple in Jerusalem. They worshipped God in their own land. And so there was, like I said, there's animosity between the two groups. So imagine this story, how if Jesus told this story in other places, imagine how that would fall on the ears of people to hear that the person who's lifted up as the one who returned and gave thanks to God was a Samaritan. So in both of these, so the connection between the gospel, one of the connections between the gospel and the first reading, is a reminder that that the works of God and the ways that God works faith in people is mysterious and beyond our understanding. And we should never write anybody off, because you never know who is going to be impacted by God's healing or God's mercy, or some way that God comes to them in their lives to all of a sudden come to faith and believe and be an example, really, of how to give thanks to God for what God has done for us. And so, they were definitely both really interesting stories, but that story of Naaman, the Aramean army commander, has always been a story of interest to me, for the reasons that I mentioned in the sermon. How many different no-name people had to step in and be kind of guide Naaman in the direction to find God's healing. And so that was the other connection, or the other reminder of any ordinary person like us God can work through us to do extraordinary things in the lives of others. So I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts on these scriptures or on the sermon from this past weekend. So feel free to share them in the comments. And I thank you so much for watching. God bless.